I used to think that space was the final frontier, that whatever mysteries lay beyond our atmosphere were meant to inspire awe, not dread. But that was before they arrived, and everything I thought I knew about the universe turned into a nightmare. It started with a warning, one no one took seriously. Reports of unidentified objects skimming the upper atmosphere. Nothing unusual for the likes of astronomers who always claimed they saw something extraordinary. But these objects, unlike previous sightings, moved with precision, breaking the formation of Earth's natural satellites and circling in ways that defied any logical orbit. I was in the control room of the New Horizons Observatory when the first signal came through. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and everyone's eyes snapped to the enormous central screen where dots converged, multiplying and closing in from all sides. An invasion? No, that sounded ridiculous. I thought it was some strange cosmic event, a spectacle, until the dots grew bigger and bigger. And then came the voice, crackling through the radio. To the inhabitants of Earth, stand down. Your planet has been claimed by the Threxian Dominion. Resistance is futile. I was paralyzed, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the hum of machinery and the nervous whispers of the team. Then, chaos erupted. People shouted over one another, some racing to their stations, while others fumbled with the equipment, trying to make sense of the data flooding in. I didn't move. The name Threxian repeated over and over in my mind like a broken record. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. We'd always joked about little green men coming to say hello, but there was nothing friendly about the cold tone of that transmission. This was the real deal, an extraterrestrial species declaring war. And that's when I saw it. The ships, descending like flaming arrows. Hundreds of them. The sky above the observatory, normally a vast expanse of black, was now a canvas of bright, searing trails. But instead of breaking through our atmosphere, the ships began to glow, a terrible, searing white, as if they were being burned alive. One by one, they disintegrated. The heat must have been unimaginable. It was like watching a meteor shower in reverse. Except, instead of burning up before impact, they melted. Alien metal fused with the elements of our atmosphere, turning into a rain of molten debris. The air shimmered with the intensity of the heat. No one could explain it. Alien alloys, superior, advanced, weren't supposed to react like that. Earth was supposed to be harmless. "Larissa, are you seeing this?" Dr. Brennan's voice shook me out of my trance. My mentor, an aging astrophysicist with a penchant for disaster scenarios, was white as a ghost, his hands trembling as he pointed to the screen. "I see it," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But why? Why are they burning up?" His eyes narrowed, the wrinkles on his face deepening as he watched the carnage. "Something about our atmosphere, it's reacting with their ships. But that doesn't make sense. Nothing we know should do that." I shook my head, feeling a cold sweat break out along my spine. It's like they underestimated us. Or maybe they didn't know what they were dealing with. "Or maybe," he said grimly, "there's something we don't know about our own planet." I didn't respond, but his words echoed in my head as I watched the sky burn. The observatory was on high alert. Alarms continued blaring as we scrambled to make sense of the situation. I threw myself into work, pulling up atmospheric data, scanning through the records, trying to find anything that could explain the anomaly. There was nothing. No anomalies, no spikes in chemical levels, no radiation flux. Nothing that could explain why Earth's atmosphere was turning their ships into slag. And then, the power went out. The entire facility plunged into darkness, leaving only the emergency red lights flickering like ominous beacons. The temperature dropped rapidly, and my breath became visible in the chill. "What the hell is going on?" one of the technicians shouted. "The generator! Someone check the generator!" another voice yelled. Panic was spreading, the atmosphere in the room turning from confusion to fear. But I stood frozen, staring out the observation window. In the darkness, the glow of the ship's remains was still visible, streaking through the sky like burning embers. And then I noticed something. A shape, massive, too large to be any of the melting ships, hovering just above the horizon. My hands tightened into fists. This was something else, something that wasn't burning up like the others. My stomach twisted as the realization hit me. Whatever this was, it wasn't just another ship. It was the command vessel. I grabbed the nearest portable radio and tuned in to the global emergency frequency. Static filled my ears, followed by frantic voices, military reports, scientists from other observatories, all relaying the same message: more ships were incoming, and this time they weren't melting. "It's like they've adapted," I muttered, feeling the weight of dread settle over me. "They're learning." Dr. Brennan was beside me, his expression grave. "This is bad, Larissa. If they've figured out a way to bypass the atmosphere, we could be looking at a full-scale ground invasion." I gritted my teeth, staring at the dark shape that loomed larger by the second. "We're not going down without a fight." He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "We need to find out what they're after. Why Earth? Why now?" I nodded, adrenaline flooding my veins. "We need answers, and fast." The next few hours blurred together in a haze of frenzied activity. I was on the move, coordinating with other scientists, tapping into global networks, and scanning every piece of data I could get my hands on. But there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a whisper of doubt that grew louder with every passing minute. There was something we were missing. Something about Earth itself, our atmosphere, that had turned the Threxians' advantage into a fatal weakness. And if we could figure out what it was, maybe we could use it to turn the tide. But it wasn't just about the atmosphere. There was a pattern in the data, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was as if the Threxians had known Earth's potential all along and had tried to suppress it, only to find themselves undone by their own arrogance. "Marissa, come look at this," Dr. Brennan called out. His voice was tight, urgent. I hurried over, staring at the screen where he pointed. The readings from the atmosphere, specifically from the upper layers, were spiking with unknown compounds. Compounds we had never detected before. "What the?" "It's not natural," he said, his eyes wide. "These compounds, these aren't supposed to be here." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you saying?" He nodded slowly. "Someone, or something, put them there." I felt my world shift beneath my feet. Earth, the harmless planet, the one they'd underestimated, was it hiding a secret even we didn't know about? I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the data. The compounds Dr. Brennan and I were seeing, they didn't match anything recorded on Earth before. It was like someone had dropped alien chemistry into our atmosphere. But the patterns, the way they behaved, it almost felt deliberate. Dr. Brennan was pacing behind me, his footsteps heavy on the metal floor. "This changes everything. If these compounds were artificially placed, it means someone knew this invasion was coming." I leaned in closer, scrolling through the atmospheric readings. The spikes were clustered, like signals, highly localized, almost as if someone had programmed the atmosphere to react in a specific way when the Threxians arrived. Or maybe it's been there all along, waiting. He paused mid-step, his eyes narrowing. "You're saying Earth has had this defense mechanism in place for centuries, and we're only finding out about it now?" I felt the weight of the thought press down on me. Maybe. Or someone knew the Threxians were coming and prepared. I tapped the screen, pointing to a dense cluster of spikes over the Pacific Ocean. "There's something out there. This cluster, it's different from the others. It's too concentrated." "Could be a deployment site," he muttered. "We need to get a closer look." I grabbed my tablet, inputting commands to direct the observatory's long-range sensors. The screen flickered, zooming in on the location. My heart pounded as the image resolved, an expanse of deep blue water, undisturbed, until the feed suddenly cut to static. "What the?" I smacked the side of the monitor, but nothing. The connection was dead. Dr. Brennan's eyes met mine, his expression tense. "They're jamming us. The Threxians are adapting faster than we thought." The emergency lights flickered again, and I felt the chill in the air intensify. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling a knot of anxiety form in my stomach. If they've landed ground forces, they'll come for us first. We're the ones broadcasting their failure. Then we need to move, he said, grabbing his bag. There's nothing more we can do from here. We have to get out and regroup. As we left the control room, the building's automated systems began shutting down one by one. Security doors slammed shut behind us, and the temperature continued to plummet. The entire facility was being locked down. The Threxians weren't wasting time. The halls were empty, the hum of the ventilation system now replaced with an eerie silence. We moved quickly, staying low and sticking to the shadows as we made our way to the exit. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every creak of metal made me jump. When we reached the main exit, I hesitated. If they're already on the ground, we could be walking into a trap. Dr. Brennan peered through the small window in the door. We don't have a choice. We stay here, and we're sitting ducks. He pushed the door open slowly, and we slipped out into the freezing night. The sky was still lit by the falling debris of Threxian ships, their glowing remains casting long shadows across the observatory grounds. The wind howled, carrying with it the scent of burning metal and ozone. I squinted against the brightness, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The command vessel loomed above, a silent sentinel watching from above the clouds. Head for the jeep, Dr. Brennan whispered, motioning toward the vehicle parked just a few meters away. We moved quickly, our breaths puffing in the cold air. My heart raced as I scanned the tree line, expecting Threxian soldiers to burst out at any moment. The jeep was cold to the touch, frost already forming on the windows. We climbed in, and I fumbled with the ignition. Come on, come on. The engine sputtered to life, and I hit the gas, tearing down the winding road that led away from the observatory. As we drove, I kept glancing at the sky. More ships had entered the atmosphere, and they weren't melting. Their sleek, angular forms cut through the night like silent predators. They've adapted, I muttered, feeling a wave of dread. Larissa, focus on the road, Dr. Brennan said, his voice tight. We need to reach the safe house and figure out our next move. Right. I forced myself to look away, gripping the steering wheel tightly, but the sense of unease only grew. The Threxians weren't backing down, they were doubling their efforts. Whatever was happening in Earth's atmosphere, they were determined to push through it. The road wound through the dense forest, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the darkness. We drove in silence, the weight of what we'd discovered hanging between us. But my mind was racing. The compounds in the atmosphere, the patterns, something about it all felt too calculated. Someone had set a trap, and it was working, for now. But for how long? We reached the safe house, a nondescript cabin hidden deep in the woods, and I parked the jeep behind a thicket of trees. As we approached, I keyed in the access code, and the door clicked open, revealing the cold, dimly lit interior. Dr. Brennan immediately set up his equipment, pulling out a portable scanner. We need to keep monitoring the atmospheric activity, he said. If they've figured out a way around it, we're going to need a backup plan. I nodded, but my focus was elsewhere. I walked to the small window, staring out at the treetops swaying in the wind. The Threxians were adapting, yes, but there was something about Earth, something hidden beneath the surface. I could feel it, a truth lingering just out of reach. And whatever it was, it held the key to everything. But it also meant one terrifying possibility. Earth's atmosphere might not be the only thing the Threxians were after. The safe house felt like a bubble, cut off from the chaos outside. But it wasn't safe enough, not for long. I could hear Dr. Brennan muttering behind me, tapping furiously at his portable scanner. I glanced back, watching as he tried to make sense of the atmospheric data we'd pulled. But my mind was elsewhere. That sensation of something lurking beneath Earth's surface, something ancient, nagged at me, louder now, like a ticking clock I couldn't ignore. Got anything yet? I asked, though I knew the answer before he shook his head. Whatever's happening out there isn't in any of our records, he said, rubbing his temples. These compounds, there's no natural source for them, Larissa. And the way they're behaving, it's like a defense mechanism. It's adaptive. I moved closer, peering at the monitor over his shoulder. The screen flickered, lines of data streaming across in a chaotic blur. But amidst the chaos, I noticed something else. "Wait, stop," I said, pointing at the screen. "Go back." He rewound the data, isolating a small portion of the signal. My breath caught as I stared at the screen. It wasn't just random spikes. It was a pattern, a code. "You see that?" I whispered, my heart racing. Dr. Brennan frowned, leaning in closer. That almost looks like language," I finished. "It's a message." The air in the room seemed to thicken as the realization settled over us. This wasn't just a defense system. It was communication. Someone, or something, was trying to reach out. But from where, and why now? Before we could dive any deeper, a loud rumble shook the cabin. The lights flickered, and I froze, ears straining to catch any sound over the deafening silence that followed. Dr. Brennan's eyes darted to mine, his face pale. "They've found us." I rushed to the window, heart pounding. Outside, through the dense trees, I saw them, tall, shadowy figures moving in the dark. The Threxians. "How?" I whispered, backing away from the window. Dr. Brennan slammed his hand down on the table. "We've been broadcasting. They must have picked up our signal." The tension in the room escalated instantly. There was no running now. The Threxians had us surrounded. I grabbed the small handgun from my belt, checking the magazine. "We're not getting out of here the same way we came in." Dr. Brennan looked around frantically, his face slick with sweat. "There's a back exit, but they'll be expecting that." I stood still, thinking, if the Threxians wanted us dead, they could have obliterated the cabin from the sky. But they hadn't. They'd sent ground troops that would adapt to Earth's conditions, just like their ships had. They wanted something, and they needed us alive for it. "What are they after?" Dr. Brennan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we're not going to let them get it." The cabin trembled again, this time harder. Something heavy landed on the roof, and the whole structure groaned in protest. They were closing in. I glanced at Dr. Brennan. "We have to destroy the data." "What? Are you insane?" He stared at me, wide-eyed. "That data is the key to everything. It could help us understand what's happening." I grabbed the tablet from his hands. "And if the Threxians get their hands on it, what then? We can't risk it." He hesitated, but then nodded, reluctantly. "Okay, but we need to do it fast." We quickly transferred the essential data to a secure drive, one that couldn't be hacked remotely. Then I initiated the data wipe. The screens flickered as the files disappeared, one by one. I watched, a pit growing in my stomach, as the work we'd done vanished in seconds. Suddenly, the door rattled violently. They were trying to break in. "Go!" I hissed, pushing Dr. Brennan toward the back exit. He rushed ahead of me, fumbling with the keypad as the cabin shook again. The door buckled under the force of the Threxians' blows. We didn't have much time. Finally, the back door clicked open, and we slipped outside into the freezing night. The wind howled, whipping through the trees as we crouched low, moving away from the cabin as quietly as we could. My breath was loud in my ears, every snap of a twig making me jump. As we made our way through the dense underbrush, I glanced back. The Threxians were still at the cabin, tearing through the door like it was paper. The ship above loomed large, casting long, ominous shadows over the landscape. "Where now?" Brennan asked, his voice shaky. I scanned the tree line, my mind racing. We needed to find higher ground, somewhere we could get a signal out without being detected again. But every second we lingered here, the more likely they were to catch up. "There," I pointed to a ridge just visible through the trees. "We'll try and make it to the top. From there, we can figure out our next move." Dr. Brennan nodded, and we set off, moving as fast as we could without drawing attention. But the forest felt alive with danger. Every rustle in the leaves, every gust of wind carried a new threat. The Threxians weren't just soldiers, they were hunters, and we were their prey. We reached the base of the ridge and began the climb, the cold biting at our exposed skin. My muscles burned as we pulled ourselves up the rocky slope, but I didn't dare slow down, not with the Threxians so close behind. About halfway up, we paused, both of us gasping for air. I looked out over the forest below, the cabin now just a distant speck in the darkness. For a moment, everything was still, but I knew it wouldn't last. "We need to figure out what this is," I said, pulling out the secure drive. "This code, it's more than just a defense mechanism. Someone's trying to tell us something." Dr. Brennan wiped his brow, nodding. "But how do we decode it?" I stared at the screen, my mind spinning. There had to be a way. We'd come too far, survived too much, to let the answer slip through our fingers. But even as I thought that, the creeping sensation returned. The feeling that there was more at stake than we realized. That we were standing on the edge of something far larger than just an alien invasion. Something was watching us. And I had the unsettling suspicion that whatever it was, it had been watching for a long time. The climb up the ridge felt endless, and the cold seeped into my bones, but I pushed on. Every muscle ached, but the instinct to survive outweighed any fatigue. Beside me, Dr. Brennan's breathing was labored, each step a battle. I kept scanning the forest below, aware that we were racing against time. We finally reached the summit, our breath pluming in the frigid air. The view was breathtaking, if it wasn't for the dread curling in my gut. The forest stretched out below like an endless sea of shadows, and beyond, the glow of distant cities flickered under the night sky. Cities that, for all we knew, were already under attack. I pulled out the secure drive and powered it up. The interface flickered to life, casting a blue glow across my face. The code was still there, lines of indecipherable symbols shifting in rhythm. It felt deliberate, almost like it was alive. "Okay, what's the plan?" Brennan asked, crouching next to me. "We need to crack this." I nodded, my fingers flying over the keys. "We isolate the patterns and cross-check them against Earth's recorded languages, ancient and modern. If there's any match, even partial, it might give us a clue." As I worked, a low hum filled the air. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder, resonating through the ground beneath us. Dr. Brennan and I exchanged a look. Something was moving below. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and the ridge beneath us shifted. We scrambled for balance, grabbing onto rocks as the earth quivered like it was waking up from a deep sleep. "What the—" Brennan started, but I cut him off. "Hang on." The tremors intensified, and then, in the distance, a massive plume of light erupted from the ground. It shot into the sky, lit the forest like a second dawn. I stared, transfixed, as the beam stabilized, forming a column of pure energy that pulsed with life. "This isn't natural," Brennan whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar. It's an opening." I knew he was right. Whatever lay beneath the surface was no geological phenomenon. Someone, or something, had activated it, and I had a sinking feeling it was tied to the Threxians. I refocused on the screen. The patterns on the secure drive aligned, their shifting symbols settling into coherent shapes. It wasn't Earth language, but the structure, its syntax, was eerily similar. I isolated one segment, highlighting it in red. "Look," I said, showing Brennan the screen. "It's forming a sentence, a message." He squinted, reading it aloud. "Guardian awakened. Return required." We exchanged a glance. "Guardian?" I echoed. What could that mean? Brennan's face paled. "You don't think they're talking about Earth itself, do you? That Earth is some kind of guardian." It sounded insane, but the evidence was piling up. The energy beam, the adaptive atmosphere, the strange code, all of it suggested that Earth was more than just a planet. It was a mechanism designed to react when threatened. The Threxians' arrival had triggered it, and now, whatever lay dormant beneath our feet was coming to life. Before we could process further, a distant roar filled the sky. We both turned, watching as a Threxian ship, sleek and predatory, broke through the clouds. It hovered above the energy column, its sleek hull glinting in the light. I felt a chill, This was different from their previous attempts. They were no longer probing. They were acting, and they were desperate. "We need to move," I said, shoving the secure drive into my pack. "They're not here to play games anymore." Dr. Brennan nodded, and we began our descent down the other side of the ridge, moving swiftly but cautiously. The forest loomed larger, the shadows thicker. Every step felt like a gamble. One wrong move, and we'd be spotted. Halfway down, the air around us pulsed, like the static charge before a storm. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "What's that?" Brennan whispered, his voice tight with fear. I scanned the treetops. Something moved, a shimmer, like heat haze. But it wasn't just one shimmer. Multiple figures flickered into view, moving with unnatural speed. My grip tightened around the handle of my sidearm. "Stay low," I whispered, crouching down. We crept through the underbrush, every nerve on high alert. The shimmering figures darted through the trees, converging on the energy column. The Threxians had deployed ground troops, cloaked and lethal. "Why now?" Brennan hissed. "Why all this activity?" I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing: the Threxians weren't just here to fight. They were searching for something connected to the energy column and the message we'd uncovered. A thought struck me, and it sent a chill down my spine. "They think we're after it, too." Dr. Brennan's eyes widened. "You mean they believe we know about the Guardian? Or that we're trying to activate it before they do?" I looked back at the column. Either way, we're caught in the middle of it. We reached a small clearing and paused, catching our breath. I activated the secure drive again, scanning for any updates. The message had shifted slightly. New lines had appeared, more complex than before. I strained to make sense of it. "The Guardian is not alone," I read aloud. "Others will follow." Dr. Brennan paled. "Others? More Threxians? Maybe. Or maybe something worse." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The code wasn't just a warning, it was a countdown. The Guardian wasn't simply waking up, it was calling for reinforcements. And Earth was its battlefield. We needed to get ahead of this, find a way to decipher the rest of the message before it was too late. If Earth truly was a Guardian, it wasn't just our planet at stake. It was our responsibility to understand what it was guarding against. "We need to get closer to the energy column," I said. "There's something there, and it might be the key to all of this." Brennan hesitated. "Are you sure? It's risky." "I know, but it's the only chance we have." I met his gaze, resolute. "We either find out the truth, or we wait for whatever's coming, and I'd rather not wait." With a reluctant nod, he agreed. Together, we set our sights on the glowing column in the distance, and with each step, the weight of what we were about to uncover pressed down harder. As we approached, the ground trembled again, and the air thickened, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Something was waiting for us. As we closed in on the energy column, its intensity grew, casting the forest in a bright, unnatural light. It was as if night had been banished in that one spot, replaced by a searing, constant dawn. The ground trembled, sending ripples through the trees, their branches shuddering in the electric air. Dr. Brennan moved ahead, keeping low. I followed, careful to stay in the shadows, every sense on high alert. The Threxians' ground units were still somewhere nearby, and getting caught now would mean an end to everything. The closer we got, the more I noticed strange markings on the trees and ground, like scorch marks, but with no signs of fire. I paused, running my fingers over one of them. The bark crumbled away, leaving a metallic residue on my skin. "What do you make of it?" Brennan whispered, glancing over his shoulder. I rubbed my fingers together, feeling the residue's cold, unnatural texture. "It's not from the column. This looks older, much older." He frowned, looking around at the forest as if seeing it for the first time. "You think something else was here before the Threxians arrived?" "More than that. Whatever left these marks, it's part of this place's history. It might even explain why the Threxians are so interested." I wiped my hand on my sleeve, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. We continued moving, and the hum from the column grew louder, almost deafening. I could see its base now, smooth and seamless, like a shard of pure light stabbing into the earth. But there was something else, a structure, half buried in the ground, surrounding the column. Its surface was covered in alien glyphs, some of them matching the patterns on the secure drive. Brennan crouched beside me, eyes wide. It's a gateway. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. A gateway? You mean, it's not just an energy source? He shook his head, pointing at the glyphs. No, it's a portal, something designed to open and close. The Threxians aren't just studying Earth, they're trying to use it. The air vibrated with the column's energy, the ground pulsing beneath us. If Brennan was right, this wasn't just a defense mechanism, it was a technology capable of bringing things in, or sending them out. I felt the weight of the situation settle on my shoulders. They're trying to activate it, I said, the truth dawning on me. To bring something through. The thought was terrifying. If the Threxians were this desperate, it meant whatever they were after had the potential to shift the balance in the galaxy, maybe even wipe us out. But what were they after, and why was Earth the key? We have to find a way in, I said. If we can access the gateway's control, we might be able to stop them. Brennan hesitated. And if we can't? I didn't have an answer. Failure wasn't an option. If the Threxians succeeded, they wouldn't just gain a foothold. They'd open a door to whatever power lay beyond, and Earth would be caught in the crossfire. We moved forward, sticking close to the structure's wall. The glyphs flickered with a dim glow as we passed, almost as if responding to our presence. When we reached what looked like an entrance, a jagged opening half buried in the dirt, I paused, scanning the area. No signs of Threxian guards, but that didn't mean we were safe. The interior of the gateway structure was dark, light only by the glow from the energy column filtering through cracks in the walls. I felt the air shift as we stepped inside, cooler, and with an electric charge that made the hair on my arms stand on end. We need to find the control hub, I whispered, moving deeper into the structure. If there's a way to shut this thing down, it'll be there. The walls around us were covered in more glyphs, their patterns shifting as we walked past. It was like the entire structure was alive, responding to our presence. I kept the secure drive open, scanning the symbols, trying to find a match. And then I saw it, a familiar pattern, one that matched the coded message we decrypted earlier. The glyphs pulsed, aligning in a sequence that formed a path deeper into the structure. This way, I said, my voice hushed. We followed the path, the air growing colder with each step. The hum of the energy column faded, replaced by a different sound, one that was fainter, but more ominous. It was a rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat, echoing through the walls. What's causing that? Brennan asked, his voice tense. I don't know, I admitted, but we're getting closer. The passage opened up into a larger chamber, and what we saw made my blood run cold. The walls were lined with pods, thousands of them, each containing a figure encased in a translucent material. They weren't human, and they weren't Threxian. They were something else entirely. Brennan stared, his face pale. What are they? I shook my head. No idea, but they've been here for a long time. The figures were humanoid, but their features were elongated, their limbs too thin, their eyes too large. They looked like a cross between Earth's mythology and something out of a nightmare. The glyphs on the pods pulsed in unison, matching the rhythm of the heartbeat sound. These aren't just pods, I said, realization dawning. They're stasis chambers. Brennan's eyes widened. You mean they're alive? Or they were. Maybe they still are. I glanced at the pods, dread creeping up my spine. And if the Threxians activate the gateway, they might be waking up. We needed to move faster. Whatever this place was, it held secrets that went beyond anything we could comprehend. And if the Threxians got what they wanted, Earth wouldn't just be a battleground. It'd be the epicenter of something far more dangerous. I spotted a terminal at the far end of the chamber and rushed toward it. The interface was covered in more glyphs, but some of the symbols matched those on the secure drive. I plugged the drive into the terminal, praying it would work. The screen flickered, lines of code shifting before aligning. The terminal responded, the glyphs reconfiguring into a language I could barely recognize. A series of prompts appeared, one of them flashing red. "Emergency override," I muttered, reading the prompt. This might be our chance. Brennan stood beside me, tension etched on his face. "Do it. Whatever it takes, stop them." I took a deep breath and keyed in the command. The screen flashed, the glyphs spinning faster. The hum of the energy column outside intensified, and the chamber's heartbeat sound quickened, becoming a frantic rhythm. As the terminal processed the override, a voice, deep, resonant, and alien, echoed through the structure. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, but its tone was clear. The Guardian was awakening, and whatever lay beyond that gateway was coming for us. The alien voice echoed through the chamber, reverberating in a way that felt like it was crawling inside my skull. Each syllable drummed with an otherworldly rhythm, making the walls seem alive, pulsing with an eerie glow. It was like the structure was speaking back, a language long dormant, and now, for the first time in centuries, woken. I gripped the terminal's edge, my fingers cold against the metallic surface. The override sequence continued to run, numbers and glyphs flickering faster and faster. But there was something else, a presence, watching, feeling its way into my mind. The longer I stared at the screen, the more I sensed it pushing back. "Larissa!" Brennan's voice snapped me out of the trance. I blinked, shaking the strange haze clouding my thoughts. "What's happening?" "I don't know," I muttered. "But it's not just a program, it's fighting back." The realization sent a shiver down my spine. Whatever intelligence had built this place had anticipated intruders, and we were tripping every alarm in its arsenal. A low rumble shook the chamber, and the stasis pods lining the walls began to glow, their light spreading like fire. The figures inside remained motionless, but the glyphs on the pods pulsated with new energy. They weren't just being preserved, they were being activated. I glanced back at Brennan. "We need to get out of here, now." He hesitated, torn between curiosity and survival. "But the override." "There's no time," I snapped, yanking the secure drive from the terminal. "We don't know what we're waking up, and I don't want to find out." As if in response, the chamber's hum shifted to a high-pitched whine. I could feel the vibrations in my bones, the pressure building like a scream ready to burst. We bolted for the exit, weaving through the maze of pods. The light intensified, casting long shadows that danced on the walls, and that alien voice kept speaking, rising in volume. Outside the structure, the energy column had changed. What had once been a steady beam was now flickering, its light splitting into jagged, chaotic streams. The ground quaked beneath our feet, and the air buzzed with static. It felt like the entire forest was charged, the atmosphere alive with tension. "We have to shut it down from outside," I said, panting as we sprinted toward a nearby ridge. "If the Threxians have control of this gateway, they might be able to activate it remotely." Brennan nodded, his eyes scanning the landscape. "There, look." He pointed toward the far side of the column, where several Threxian hovercraft had landed, their crews working on something. It was a control array, its surface bristling with sensors and cables snaking into the ground. The Threxians had integrated their technology into the alien structure, linking it to their systems. If they succeeded in synchronizing it, they'd have access to the gateway's full capabilities. My stomach nodded. "We need to sabotage it." Brennan's face was grim. "That won't be easy. They've got ground units all over." "I know." I felt the weight of our predicament settle in, like a tightening vice. "But if we don't, Earth is done." We circled the ridge, keeping low as we approached the Threxian position. The terrain was rough, offering some cover, but the Threxians were thorough. Patrols crisscrossed the area, and every few seconds, drones zipped overhead, scanning the forest with their blue, probing lights. The control array loomed ahead, its lights blinking in rhythm with the flickering column. I motioned for Brennan to hold, watching as two Threxians in armored suits moved past. Their visors gleamed in the glow of the column, and they carried plasma rifles, their movements precise and mechanical. "On my signal," I whispered, feeling the adrenaline surge. "We'll split up. Draw their attention away from the array. I'll set the charges." Brennan's expression was tight, but he nodded. "Make it quick." I handed him a small explosive, just enough to cause a distraction without revealing our position. "See you on the other side." He moved off, keeping to the shadows. I stayed low, creeping closer to the array. The Threxians were focused on their work, oblivious to the danger. The array's lights pulsed, and I could see the code streaming on its interface, symbols I recognized from the structure's terminal. I set the charges, fingers steady despite the chaos around me. Each second felt like an eternity, every sound amplified in the stillness of my mind. The alien voice continued to murmur, and I could feel its presence growing stronger, like tendrils creeping into my thoughts. Just as I finished arming the final charge, a bright flash erupted on the opposite side of the ridge. Brennan's distraction. The Threxians turned, weapons raised, their attention drawn away from the array. I seized the moment, ducking out of sight as the first explosion rippled through the forest. The Threxians shouted, their language a harsh, staccato rhythm that echoed through the trees. I sprinted back toward our rendezvous point, the charges ticking down behind me. The ground shuddered as another explosion tore through the air, sending debris and plasma fire arcing overhead. "Larissa, go!" Brennan's voice came through the calm, urgent. "They're mobilizing. Get clear." I reached the edge of the ridge, diving behind a fallen tree as the charges detonated. The blast wave ripped through the Threxian position, and the array crumbled, its components sparking and flaring as they were torn apart. The energy column flickered, its light stuttering, and I felt a brief surge of triumph. But it was short-lived. As I looked back, the column's light didn't fade, it intensified. The jagged streams coalesced, forming a new shape, an arch of light that burned into the sky. The Threxians hadn't lost control, they'd activated it. The air crackled, and a rift began to open within the archway, swirling with an impossible depth. I stared, feeling the pull, the gravity of its presence. It wasn't just a gateway, it was a conduit, and it was drawing something through. "Brennan, it's active," I shouted, panic clawing at my voice. He reached my side, eyes wide as he saw the rift. "We have to get back, find a way to shut it down from HQ." As the ground continued to quake, the forest trembled, and the column's hum became a roar, I realized the true scale of our situation. We weren't dealing with just another alien invasion. Something far worse was coming, and Earth was about to be the battleground for its arrival. We ran. The ground beneath us buckled and split as the energy column continued to pulse, transforming the air into a seething mix of heat and electricity. The sky above flickered between shades of deep blue and blinding white, like a storm caught between two worlds. The forest path twisted ahead of us, barely visible in the strobe of light and shadow. Brennan and I ducked low, weaving through the underbrush as plasma bolts zipped past, searing the foliage. The Threxians were mobilizing, and their shouts, sharp and urgent, pierced the night. We dove behind a rocky outcrop, catching our breath for a moment. "This gateway isn't just a portal, it's a weapon," I said, wiping the sweat from my brow. "They're using it to tear open a rift." Brennan's eyes darted to the glowing archway, its shape now fully formed and stable. The edges rippled like molten glass, a doorway to somewhere beyond our comprehension. "A weapon?" he repeated, disbelief and frustration mixed in his voice. "Why Earth? What are they trying to bring through?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not just Threxians on the other side of that gateway. It's something older, something they don't fully understand either." A deep rumble rolled through the ground, and the air grew thick, vibrating with a low, ominous hum. I peered over the rocks and saw them, the Threxian engineers and soldiers, scrambling to stabilize their equipment, their movements frantic as the rift surged with energy. Their technology was advanced, but it looked like even they were struggling to control the power coursing through the portal. "We need to get to HQ," I said, urgency pressing down like a vice. "If we can relay what's happening, Maybe we can coordinate a counter-strike." Brennan nodded, his face grim. "And if we can't? Then we need to shut it down ourselves." We kept moving, threading through the forest as the roar of the gateway faded behind us. The landscape shifted from the tangled underbrush into a vast expanse of rocky terrain dotted with strange, crystalline formations. Each crystal pulsed faintly, echoing the same rhythm as the gateway's energy column. A chill ran down my spine. "These crystals, they're connected to the portal somehow." "Conduits?" Brennan suggested, scanning the area. "Could they be amplifying the signal?" "Or stabilizing it," I added. "If we destroy them, it might destabilize the gateway." We moved cautiously, navigating the maze of crystals. Each one seemed to hum with life, casting a soft, eerie glow that felt like the heartbeat of the planet itself. I crouched beside one, examining its structure. The crystal's surface was smooth and cool, but beneath the surface, it thrummed with an energy that was almost alive. I set a small charge at its base, the timer clicking as I activated it. "If we blow enough of these, it could overload the system," I said, moving on to the next one. Brennan followed, setting his own charges. "We need to be quick. The Threxians will notice something's off." As we worked, the sky above darkened, the clouds swirling and gathering like a vortex. The air felt heavy, every breath thick with static. I could sense the gateway's influence spreading, altering the environment. Trees twisted, their branches reaching unnaturally toward the sky, and the ground beneath our feet cracked, glowing faintly with that same crystalline energy. A sudden noise cut through the air, a high-pitched screech like metal grinding against metal. I turned, instinctively raising my weapon, and froze. In the distance, something was emerging from the gateway. The rift had widened, its edges swirling in a chaotic dance as a massive, serpentine shape began to materialize. It was unlike anything I'd seen before, massive, armored with plates of chitin-like material, and its eyes glowed with a deep, malevolent light. It moved with a sinuous grace, as if feeling its way into our reality, testing the air. I held my breath, heart pounding. "What the hell is that?" Brennan's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's no Threxian." The creature's gaze swept the landscape, and I felt its eyes land on us, even from a distance. There was an intelligence behind those eyes, an ancient, calculating awareness that sent a chill straight to my core. "We need to move," I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at me. "Now." We sprinted through the maze of crystals, detonating charges as we went. Explosions rippled through the field, and the ground shook, crystals shattering and sending sparks of blue light into the air. The creature let out another ear-splitting roar, its form becoming clearer as it pushed further through the rift. Suddenly, a burst of plasma fire erupted nearby. Threxian soldiers emerged from the tree line, weapons blazing as they advanced on our position. Brennan fired back, and I followed suit, ducking behind a fallen tree for cover. The air was alive with the sounds of battle, explosions, plasma bolts, and the roar of the creature that loomed closer with every passing second. We managed to take out a few of the soldiers, but they kept coming, relentless and coordinated. "We're outnumbered," Brennan shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "We just need to hold them off long enough for the charges to." A massive explosion tore through the crystal field, the shockwave knocking me off my feet. The ground beneath us erupted, and for a moment, everything was noise and light. I scrambled to my feet, disoriented, as debris rained down. The creature roared again, this time with a fury that sent the air trembling. But the crystal field was shattered. The energy that had once pulsed through the formations flickered, dimming. The ground no longer vibrated with the same intensity, and the gateway's beam faltered, its light growing unstable. "It's working," I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. "The rift is destabilizing." Brennan grinned, but his expression turned grim as more Threxian soldiers emerged, advancing rapidly. "We need to finish this, Larissa. They won't stop." The creature in the sky let out a howl of rage as the rift wavered, its form fading in and out, caught between dimensions. It struggled, clawing at the edges of the gateway, and for a moment its eyes locked with mine. There was a flash of understanding, an exchange of intent so intense it left me breathless. It wasn't just a creature, it was intelligent, and it was determined to make Earth its domain. "Go," I shouted, throwing down my last charge and setting the timer. "This'll take out the gateway for good." Brennan hesitated, then nodded. We sprinted away, diving into the cover of the trees as the final explosion detonated. The ground shuddered one last time, and the gateway's beam flickered, then collapsed, the rift snapping shut with a blinding flash. As the light faded, silence fell over the landscape. I exhaled, heart still racing. Did we? Before I could finish, a low rumble echoed through the ground, and the energy field crackled back to life. The gateway might have collapsed, but the Threxians had already set something in motion, something far bigger than we anticipated. The air was still, the silence unsettling. I crouched low behind a tree, scanning the remains of the crystal field. The gateway was gone, but the energy left in its wake rippled through the earth like a scar that refused to heal. The landscape felt warped, the trees twisted in unnatural directions, and the once clear sky was smeared with streaks of violet and crimson. Brennan knelt beside me, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I don't like this. Something's off." He was right. The silence felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. We had shut down the gateway, but the Threxians hadn't just been after a portal. They'd been building something far more dangerous. "There should be Threxians swarming this area," I said, whispering as my eyes flicked across the terrain. "They're regrouping. We're not out of the woods yet." A faint hum started vibrating through the air, a low frequency that resonated deep in my bones. I touched the ground. It was trembling again, but this time it wasn't from the shattered crystals. This felt like something larger, moving beneath the surface, building pressure. "We need to get out of here," I urged, gripping my weapon tighter. "Whatever's coming, it's big." We slipped through the forest, staying low and moving fast. The further we went, the clearer it became that the forest itself was changing. Trees that had once stood tall and proud were now wilting, their bark peeling back as if scorched from within. The foliage, once vibrant, had turned to ash, and the air was heavy with the stench of decay. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I knew. The gateway had been a conduit, but it was never meant to stay open long. The Threxians had engineered it to tear open our reality, but the side effects were worse than I'd imagined. It was as if the energy they'd unleashed was corrupting everything it touched, warping the land and the atmosphere alike. We reached a ridge that overlooked the area where the gateway had been, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The once crystalline field was now a crater, but it wasn't empty. In its place, something was emerging, slowly, methodically. Massive, metallic tendrils reached out from the depths of the crater, each one pulsating with a dark, greenish glow. They moved with purpose, snaking through the rubble and crystal fragments like fingers searching for a grip. I watched as one tendril coiled around a broken piece of Threxian machinery, pulling it into the ground. "Is that organic?" Brennan asked, his voice barely a whisper. I shook my head, unable to look away. "It's not Threxian tech, that's for sure, but it's feeding on whatever they left behind." The tendrils moved with eerie precision, consuming every trace of the destroyed gateway. It was as if they were cleaning up the remnants of Threxian technology, repurposing it for something else. The thought chilled me. Whatever was below the surface, it had an intelligence, a plan. I felt a familiar sense of dread creep up my spine. They weren't just opening a gateway for travel, they were summoning something. Brennan's eyes met mine, and I saw the same fear mirrored there. But why? Why risk their own ships, their own soldiers? They weren't risking them, they were bait. I realized it all at once. The Threxians knew our atmosphere was hostile, but they used their own people to trigger a response. They needed to weaken Earth's defenses long enough to let this thing through. It made a twisted sort of sense. Earth's atmosphere had been their barrier, but once they breached it, they had unleashed something we were only beginning to understand. I scanned the area again, looking for a way out. We need to regroup and warn command. They need to know what's happening here. We moved quickly, staying within the shadows of the dying forest. But as we navigated the terrain, the ground beneath us felt increasingly unstable. With every step, the vibrations grew stronger, and the air became hotter, as if the earth itself was ready to split open. We reached a clearing, but my instincts screamed that something was wrong. The air was too still, the silence too heavy. "Stay alert," I warned. Suddenly, the ground erupted beneath us. A massive tendril shot up, whipping through the air like a serpent striking. I barely had time to roll out of its path, the heat from its surface searing my skin. Brennan dodged to the side, firing his weapon, but the shots only bounced off its metallic surface. "Run!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. We sprinted through the clearing as the tendril crashed down, sending a shockwave that knocked us off our feet. I landed hard, the impact jarring every bone in my body. I forced myself up, pain radiating through my ribs. "Brennan," I called, scanning the chaos. He was a few feet away, tangled in debris. I ran to him, helping him up as another tendril slammed into the ground, missing us by inches. We scrambled to our feet, sprinting through the wreckage as more tendrils emerged, each one searching, seeking. We ducked behind a boulder, panting. The ground was alive now, tendrils reaching and retreating like the limbs of some massive creature testing its surroundings. "We can't keep running," Brennan said, his face pale. "We need to figure out what it's after." I nodded, gripping my weapon. "It's hunting for something, maybe the remaining Threxian tech, or something deeper in the ground." Or us, I thought, though I didn't say it. The feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever. The tendrils were searching with purpose, and I had the sinking suspicion that they were guided by something far more intelligent than the Threxians. "We need to draw it away," I said. "If we can get it to focus on us, maybe we can find a way to disable it." Brennan looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but he nodded. "Let's do it." We bolted from our hiding spot, weaving through the rubble and dodging the tendrils as they lashed out. I fired a few rounds, each one aimed at the base of the tendrils, hoping to find a weak spot. But they moved too fast, each strike more precise, each attempt to grab us more accurate. As we ran, I noticed something, a faint pattern in the ground, a series of glowing lines that seemed to converge. "Brennan, look." He followed my gaze. "A power source, or a control center. If we could find the source of the tendril's power, we might have a chance to disrupt it. Follow the lines, let's go." We sprinted, staying ahead of the tendrils as the lines pulsed brighter. The heat intensified, the air thickening with a metallic tang. The lines led to a central point, a cavernous opening where the tendrils seemed to converge. As we approached, the ground split wide, revealing a vast underground chamber. Tendrils writhed around a central core, an orb-like structure pulsating with energy. I stared at it, realization dawning. This was the source, the heart of whatever intelligence was controlling the tendrils. "It's the brain," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And it's waking up." The chamber was massive, a cathedral of alien technology. Tendrils branched out from the central orb, eon humming with power, as if it were feeding off the earth itself. The air was charged, crackling with energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The pulsating rhythm of the orb was hypnotic, like a heartbeat, each throb resonating deep in my chest. I glanced at Brennan. His eyes were locked on the core, a mixture of awe and fear painted across his face. "We can't fight this," he whispered. "Not head-on, no." My mind raced, scanning the room for anything we could use. But there has to be a way to disrupt it, if we can find its power source or a control node. Brennan's grip tightened on his weapon. "We'll be fried before we get close." The tendrils continued to pulse, moving with eerie precision, their tips flicking like tongues tasting the air. They seemed to be searching for something. No, someone. I felt the weight of their attention shift, as if the entire chamber was now aware of us. They had found their prey. "We need to move. Now," I hissed. We sprinted forward, hugging the walls as we made our way deeper into the chamber. The tendrils lashed out, narrowly missing us as they slammed into the ground, tearing chunks of earth and debris into the air. I spotted a narrow path that led behind the core, a series of metal conduits branching off like veins. If the orb was the brain, then these were its nerves. "Brennan, there," I pointed, and we ducked into the tunnel, hoping the confined space would keep the tendrils at bay. The further we went, the louder the hum became. The conduits glowed brighter, casting strange shadows on the walls. It felt like we were inside a living organism, navigating through arteries and veins. The air was suffocating, thick with the metallic scent of ozone, and something else, something primal, like the stench of blood. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller, but just as alien. Strange machinery lined the walls, each console covered in unfamiliar symbols. The conduits converged here, feeding into a massive cylindrical structure that pulsed with the same rhythm as the core outside. Brennan scanned the room, his eyes landing on a panel covered in the same symbols. "This looks like a control interface." I approached it, my hands hovering over the strange characters. The Threxians had their own language, but this was different, more advanced, more refined. Whoever had designed this was far beyond the Threxians in terms of technology. "This isn't theirs. This is something else." "Can you make sense of it?" Brennan asked, his eyes darting back to the tunnel. The sounds of the tendrils echoed through the passage, growing louder. We didn't have much time. I took a deep breath, trying to decipher the symbols. They seemed to form a pattern, but it was a logic I couldn't fully grasp. The shapes shifted and changed, almost as if they were reacting to my presence. "It's like a puzzle," I muttered, my fingers tracing the edges of the panel. The conduits pulsed faster, the entire chamber vibrating with energy. I felt a sudden pressure in my head, like a vice tightening around my skull. Images flashed behind my eyes, glimpses of alien landscapes, structures suspended in the void, and a massive, coiled entity that seemed to stretch on forever. I stumbled back, my breath hitching. Brennan caught me, his grip firm. "Larissa, what is it?" I shook my head, trying to clear the visions. It's communicating with me. The system, it's alive." The realization hit me like a punch. The tendrils, the orb, the entire network, it wasn't just technology. It was an organism, a living entity that had fused with machinery, adapting and evolving. The Threxians hadn't created it, they had awakened it. And now it was spreading, consuming everything in its path. I focused on the panel again, this time letting my instincts guide me. My fingers moved across the symbols, pressing them in a sequence that felt right. The panel flashed, and the conduits flared with energy. The pressure in my head intensified, the entity's presence growing stronger, more insistent. "They were trying to control it," I said, my voice strained. "But they failed. They didn't understand what they were dealing with." Brennan's eyes widened. "And you do?" "Not fully, but I know it's not invincible. It's still adapting, still learning." I glanced at the central cylinder, the heart of the chamber. "If we can disrupt its power, we might be able to shut it down, at least temporarily." Brennan nodded, but there was doubt in his eyes. "How do we know it won't just regenerate?" I didn't have an answer. The truth was, we didn't know what we were dealing with, but I couldn't afford to let fear paralyze me. "We won't know until we try." We moved to the cylinder, each step feeling like it could be our last. The energy was almost blinding now, the air so hot it felt like it was burning my lungs. I could feel the entity's awareness bearing down on us, a presence so vast and ancient it made my mind reel. It was as if the entire planet was waking up, and we were standing on the edge of a precipice. I found another panel, this one with a series of glowing nodes. I reached out, my hand hovering over them. "This is it. If I can overload the system." The ground shook, and a deafening roar filled the chamber. The tendrils had found us. They surged into the room, tearing through the walls like a swarm of serpents. Brennan opened fire, the shots echoing through the space, but it was like trying to hold back a flood. "Do it," he shouted. "Now." I pressed my hand to the panel, activating the nodes. The conduits flared, and the entire chamber lit up. The entity's roar grew louder, a sound that was both mechanical and organic, a howl of rage. The tendrils lashed out, one striking my shoulder and sending me crashing to the ground. Pain shot through me, but I forced myself to stay focused. I could feel the energy building, the system struggling against my interference. The cylinder started to shake, cracks forming along its surface. The conduits pulsed erratically, sparks flying as the energy surged out of control. The entity's presence filled my mind, a torrent of thoughts and emotions, anger, hunger, and something deeper: desperation. "Larissa, it's working," Brennan shouted, but his voice sounded distant, like he was shouting through a tunnel. The pain in my shoulder throbbed, and the air grew colder. I forced my hand against the panel one last time, activating the final sequence. The chamber erupted in light, the energy spiraling out of the conduits and into the core. The tendrils convulsed, the entire chamber shaking as the entity's scream filled the air. And then, silence. The energy dissipated, and the tendrils went limp, retracting back into the walls. The chamber dimmed, the once blinding light fading to a dull glow. I collapsed to the ground, my vision blurring. Brennan was at my side, pulling me up. "We did it, Larissa. It's offline." But as I looked at the core, I felt a sense of dread. It wasn't defeated, it was waiting. And it was learning. "We need to move," I said, my voice weak. "This isn't over." The silence after the storm felt wrong, like the moment of eerie calm before a tidal wave crashes down. I pushed myself up, the ache in my shoulder sharp but manageable. Brennan's eyes darted around the chamber, scanning the conduits as if expecting them to light up again. But the pulsing energy had stilled, leaving only the faint hum of dormant machinery. We moved quickly, retracing our steps through the tunnel. My mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of information that we'd gathered. The Threxians might have awakened the entity, but there was no way they could have understood its true nature. They had meddled with something far older and far more dangerous than they'd ever anticipated. But the real question was why? What had drawn them here in the first place? As we emerged from the tunnel, the night sky greeted us, thick with clouds and the smell of rain. The air was charged, heavy with an electric tension that felt unnatural. I squinted, my eyes scanning the horizon. Distant lights blinked, forming a pattern that felt familiar yet out of place. "Brennan, look," I said, pointing toward the horizon. He lifted his binoculars, focusing on the distant lights. "Signal beacons," he murmured, "but they're not Threxian. Someone else is here." I felt a chill run down my spine. The alien entity was bad enough, but if another faction was involved, things had just gotten infinitely more complicated. We need to find out who. We moved silently through the ruins, our footsteps muffled by the soft ground. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping to the point where our breath fogged. The ruins felt different now, almost alive, as if they were reacting to our presence. Shadows shifted, and the distant hum of machinery resonated through the ground. We reached an overlook where we could see the full scope of the Threxian outpost. It was a graveyard of broken ships and machinery, their metal carcasses half buried in the earth. The signal beacons were positioned around the perimeter, casting eerie blue light over the wreckage. And then I saw them, figures moving among the debris. They were tall and lithe, their bodies covered in some kind of reflective armor that shifted colors as they moved. They weren't Threxian. These were something else. "New players," Brennan whispered. "But what are they doing here?" I adjusted my night vision scope, zooming in on the figures. They moved with precision, examining the ruins with tools and scanners. They weren't scavengers, they were investigating. They're looking for something. Brennan's hand tightened on his rifle. What if they're after the entity? Maybe they know about it. I shook my head. If they did, they'd be acting differently. This looks more like research, as if they're trying to understand what happened here. We watched in silence as the figures continued their search, moving with a kind of coordinated efficiency that spoke of training and purpose. Whoever they weren't amateurs. One of them approached a downed Threxian fighter. its armor charred and melted from the atmosphere's acidic attack. The figure crouched, examining the exposed circuitry. I zoomed in closer, trying to get a better look, and that's when I saw it, an emblem on their armor. A twisting, serpentine design, almost like the silhouette of a coiled dragon. Recognition hit me like a punch. "That's the Markarian emblem," I whispered. "The same faction that clashed with the Threxians in the outer colonies." Brennan swore under his breath. "What are they doing here?" "Tracking the Threxians, maybe? Or," my thoughts raced, "they could be trying to weaponize whatever this entity is." Brennan turned to me, his expression grim. "Then we need to get ahead of them." We moved from our position, circling around the outskirts of the outpost. The rain began to fall, a cold drizzle that soaked through our gear. The ruins felt like a labyrinth, and with every step, I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching us. Whether it was the entity or the Markarians, I couldn't tell. We reached a derelict command center, its entrance half buried under rubble. The doors were scorched, twisted from the battle that had raged here. Inside, the air was stale, the smell of burnt metal and chemicals lingering like a ghost. Screens flickered with static, and the consoles emitted a faint, almost desperate whine. Brennan moved to the nearest console, wiping the dust off its surface. "If we can access their logs, we might be able to figure out what they were doing here." I nodded, setting up a portable interface to bypass the security protocols. The screen blinked to life, displaying lines of Threxian script. "Let's hope their data storage survived the fight." As the system decrypted the files, fragments of data flashed across the screen: maps, energy signatures, schematics. It was a jumble of information, but one file caught my eye: Project Catalyst. I opened it, my heart pounding. The screen displayed a 3D model of the entity's core, surrounded by layers of energy fields and containment protocols. The Threxians had been studying it, mapping its structure, trying to find a way to control it. "This isn't just an outpost," I said. It was a research facility. The Threxians were experimenting on the entity. Brennan's eyes widened. "Why would they take that risk?" I scrolled through the files, finding snippets of audio logs. The voice of a Threxian scientist crackled through the speaker, frantic and distorted. "We have underestimated its intelligence. The entity is evolving. It understands our language. It's learning how to manipulate." The recording cut off with a burst of static, and the screen went dark. I stared at the console, my mind reeling. The Threxians hadn't just woken the entity, they'd been trying to turn it into a weapon. But they'd failed. And now, the Markarians were here, possibly to pick up where the Threxians left off. Brennan leaned closer, his expression a mix of fear and determination. "Larissa, if the Markarians get their hands on this, it's over." "I know." My hands tightened into fists. "We have to stop them before they make the same mistake the Threxians did." I downloaded the data onto a portable drive, sealing the logs and wiping any trace of our access. The console powered down, the static fading into silence. We needed to move fast, before the Markarians discovered we were here. As we exited the command center, I felt the ground beneath us rumble, a low, distant tremor. The air grew thick with a strange vibration, and I knew that whatever was happening, we were running out of time. The game had changed. The entity was more than just an experiment gone wrong. It was adapting, evolving beyond anything we could imagine. And now, we weren't the only ones who had to deal with the consequences. The rumble beneath us grew, vibrating through my boots and into my bones. It wasn't just tectonic activity, it felt like a pulse, a rhythmic beat, resonating from deep within the ruins. The air seemed to thrum with energy, like a living thing, and every instinct screamed that we were standing on a fault line of something far more dangerous than we understood. "Move, now," I urged Brennan, sprinting back through the maze of debris. The tremors intensified, and the distant hum of machinery transformed into a low, mournful wail. It echoed off the stone walls, a sound like the cry of a beast awakening from centuries of slumber. We dodged fallen beams and wreckage, the light from the Markarian beacons casting long, unsettling shadows over the ruins. My mind raced. The Threxians had tampered with something far beyond their understanding, and now the Markarians were about to make the same mistake. But the real question remained: why was this entity here, on Earth, of all places? We reached a collapsed structure that had once been a control tower. Its walls, half buried and scorched, offered just enough cover. We ducked behind it, catching our breath. Brennan's face was set, eyes scanning the area as he listened for movement. "Do you think the Markarians know what they're dealing with?" he asked. "If they do, they're even crazier than I thought." I peeked over the rubble, watching as the armored figures continued their search, unaware of the rising energy around them. "But I doubt it. They're acting like this is just another Threxian site to scavenge." Brennan nodded. "So what's our next move? We can't take them all on. We need to find the source of that signal." I gestured toward the distant point where the vibrations seemed strongest. "If we can shut it down or disrupt it, maybe we can slow the entity down. We don't know how much time we have." We slipped through the shadows, moving cautiously. The rain had turned into a steady downpour, slicking the metal surfaces and making the ground treacherous. But the closer we got to the signal's origin, the louder the pulse became, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to resonate in sync with my own heartbeat. We reached the edge of a crater, one of the impact sites from the Threxian ships. At its center lay a massive structure, half buried and covered in earth. The glow of energy emanated from its core, pulsing in tandem with the tremors. It wasn't Threxian. The architecture was older, the lines and symbols etched into the surface unfamiliar, yet oddly reminiscent of ancient Earth languages. Whatever this was, it had been here for a long time, long before the Threxians or the Markarians had ever set foot on Earth. Brennan crouched beside me, his eyes wide. "What is that?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But it's not Threxian tech. This is something else entirely." A metallic clang echoed through the ruins, and we both turned to see one of the Markarian figures approaching the crater's edge. They were cautious, their weapon raised, as if sensing the same danger we did. But as they stepped closer, the entity's pulse quickened, the vibrations growing stronger. I pulled Brennan back into the shadows. "We need to get closer without being seen." We circled around, keeping low as we made our way toward the structure. The Markarian stood on the edge, staring down into the crater, oblivious to our approach. But as we crept closer, I felt a strange pressure in my head, like a whispering voice brushing against my thoughts. "Leave. This place is not for you." I froze, my hand tightening on my rifle. The voice was faint, almost indistinct, but it was there. I glanced at Brennan, but he seemed focused, unaware of the intrusion. Was it the entity, or was my mind playing tricks on me? We reached a vantage point overlooking the structure, and I pulled out my scanner, tuning it to pick up any anomalous readings. The data streamed across the screen, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Energy signatures, radiation levels, it was all off the charts. This thing wasn't just a structure, it was a containment field, designed to hold something inside. "Brennan, look at this." I showed him the readings. The Threxians didn't come here by accident. They were drawn to it, whatever's inside. "But what could be so powerful that they'd risk everything to control it?" he asked. My mind flashed back to the data logs, the Threxian scientist's frantic words. The entity is evolving, learning how to manipulate. It's not just power, I realized. It's sentient. It's been studying them, adapting to their technology. And if the Threxians were trying to control it... They lost control, Brennan finished, his expression darkening. And now the Markarians are picking up where they left off. A sudden crack of lightning split the sky, light the crater, and the structure at its center. The Markarian soldiers stepped back, shielding their eyes, and that's when the ground beneath them erupted. A tendril of energy shot upward, coiling around the soldier like a snake, lifting them into the air. The figure struggled, their armor flickering as the entity's energy surged through it. The air filled with a high-pitched screech as the Markarian was pulled closer to the structure, their body suspended in the air like a puppet on strings. "We have to move," I hissed, pulling Brennan back as the tendril retracted, dragging the Markarian into the structure's core. The soldier's scream cut off abruptly as the energy surged, and the crater lit up with a blinding flash. We ducked behind the rubble, shielding our eyes from the light. When it faded, the Markarian was gone, vanished into the entity's grasp. The ground around the crater crackled with residual energy, the air thick with the scent of ozone. Brennan's face was pale. "What the hell is this thing?" "It's feeding," I said, the realization hitting me. It's been dormant for centuries, and now it's waking up. And we're stuck in the middle of it. He scanned the horizon. If the Markarians keep probing, they'll end up like that soldier. And if the entity keeps growing, it's only a matter of time before it reaches full strength, I finished. And then, it might not stay confined to this crater. We had to act fast. I pulled up the data map again, tracing the energy signatures to their source. The Threxians had built failsafes into the structure, a series of nodes designed to contain the entity if things went wrong. But the power readings were unstable, and the nodes had been damaged. "There's a control relay nearby," I said. "If we can reactivate it, we might be able to reinforce the containment field, at least buy us some time." Brennan nodded. "Lead the way." We moved quickly, staying low as we navigated the ruins. The Markarians were still active, their figures darting through the shadows as they searched for answers of their own. But with the entity's power growing, it was only a matter of time before they realized the true danger they were facing. As we reached the relay station, I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. The entity's pulse had become a roar, like the heartbeat of an ancient beast, and I knew that whatever happened next, it would be a race against time. The entity was waking up, and we had to stop it before Earth became its feeding ground. The relay station was a tangled mess of cables, half buried in the ruins and fused with alien tech. It pulsed with faint energy, flickering sporadically as if struggling to come back online. The control panel was shattered, wires hanging like vines, sparking faintly in the rain. "We've got our work cut out for us," Brennan muttered, crouching next to the relay. He popped open his toolkit, pulling out a diagnostic device and connecting it to the frayed circuitry. "This thing's ancient, but if I can bypass the Threxian modifications, we might just get it running." I kept watch, scanning the shadows for any signs of Markarian movement. The wind howled through the ruins, and the rain pounded against the metal surfaces, masking our sounds, but not enough to drown out the entity's rhythmic pulse. It was growing louder, its energy rippling through the ground, threatening to tear everything apart. "Can you do it?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Yeah, but it's going to take a few minutes. These circuits are fried, and I'll need to reroute the power." Brennan's hands moved quickly, stripping wires and reconnecting them with practiced precision. "Just keep an eye out." I nodded, gripping my rifle tighter. The Markarians were getting closer. Their searchlights swept across the ruins, beams cutting through the darkness as they scanned for any anomalies. If they found us here, we'd be pinned between their firepower and the entity's wrath. A blast of energy crackled nearby, and I spotted two Markarians huddled near the edge of the crater. They seemed oblivious to the danger, studying the architecture with keen interest, but their presence meant we were running out of time. The ground shuddered again, the pulse growing into a roar. I could feel it in my chest now, like the thumping of a war drum. The entity was reacting to the disturbances, and its power was becoming unstable. Flashes of blue lightning arced across the sky, light the ruins in brief bursts of light. "Almost there," Brennan grunted, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Just a few more connections." A scream echoed through the ruins, and I turned to see one of the Markarians clutching their head, dropping to their knees. The other reached out to help, but before they could react, a surge of energy shot up from the ground, wrapping around the fallen figure like a web of light. "Brennan, we've got a problem," I called out, raising my rifle. The Markarian convulsed, their armor flickering as the entity's energy pulsed through them. The scream turned into a gurgle, and their body disintegrated, dissolving into a mist that was drawn into the earth. The other soldier stumbled back, firing blindly at the source, but it was too late. The ground opened up, and tendrils of energy lashed out, pulling them down. "Larissa, get down!" Brennan yelled, pulling me behind cover as the air exploded with static. A bolt of lightning struck the relay station, and for a moment, everything went white. The shockwave knocked us back, and I felt the searing heat as the energy surged through the relay circuitry. I blinked, my vision clearing to see Brennan frantically working to stabilize the system. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," I shouted. The ground beneath us was coming alive, cracks forming as the entity's power seeped through. The air hummed with a rising frequency, and the ruins trembled, pieces of debris shaking loose. The Markarians weren't just poking at the ruins, they were agitating the entity, and it was retaliating. "Got it!" Brennan shouted as the relay hummed to life, lights flickering on the console. The pulse that had filled the air dimmed slightly, the tremors slowing. The containment field was re-engaging, and for a moment it seemed like we'd bought ourselves some time. But the relay's power levels were critical, and the entire system was barely holding together. Brennan pounded a fist against the console. "This isn't gonna hold for long. We need to reinforce the other nodes." I nodded, pulling up the map. "There's another relay to the south, about half a kilometer away. If we can link the two, we might stabilize the containment field." "Then let's move," Brennan said, packing up his tools. We bolted from the relay station, weaving through the ruins as the wind howled around us. The Markarians had regrouped, and their searchlights pierced the darkness, sweeping dangerously close. I could hear their shouts, commands issued in their language, as they coordinated their movements. The rain intensified, turning the ground into a slippery mess. We slid down embankments, our boots splashing through pools of mud as we pushed toward the next relay. The air was thick with tension, and every step felt like a race against time. We reached the second relay, an obelisk-like structure jutting out from the ground, half covered in vines and rust. It was in even worse shape than the first, its surface scarred by past explosions and weathered by centuries of neglect. Brennan set to work immediately, his hands moving faster now as he connected the cables and powered up the system. I kept my rifle trained on the perimeter, my senses heightened. The Markarians were closing in. Their movement patterns indicated they were converging on our location. The relay flickered to life, its screen glowing faintly. Brennan typed in commands, linking the system to the first relay. "If we can stabilize the energy flow between these 2 points, it should contain the entity long enough for us to figure out our next move." As the relays synced, the ground tremors eased, and the pulse of energy quieted, becoming a steady thrum. The containment field expanded, its blue light casting an eerie glow over the ruins. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could actually hold this thing back. But as the energy reading stabilized, a new alert flashed on the screen. Brennan's face paled as he read the data. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart sinking. "There's another node, one we didn't see before." He pointed to the map, where a third relay, hidden deep beneath the earth, pulsed with energy. "If it destabilizes, the whole field will collapse, and it's already reaching critical levels." I clenched my teeth. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes, maybe less. We need to get down there, now." We sprinted toward the entrance to an underground passageway, marked by Threxian symbols that warned of extreme danger. The path was narrow, winding into the darkness below, lit only by the flicker of emergency lights that had long since faded to a dim glow. The air grew colder as we descended, the walls closing in around us. The hum of the entity's pulse was louder here, echoing through the tunnels like the beat of a giant heart. It was alive, and it was growing restless. We reached the bottom, and there it was, the third relay, embedded in the rock like a dormant sentinel. But it wasn't dormant anymore. Sparks flew from its surface, and the energy within it surged, creating a vortex of light and heat. Brennan wasted no time, moving in to connect the cables and access the control panel. I kept my eyes on the shadows, the whispering voice returning to my mind, louder now. "You cannot contain me. I have waited for centuries, and I will not be caged again." I shook off the voice, focusing on the task at hand. We don't have long, if you can't stabilize it. Working on it, Brennan snapped, sweat dripping down his face as he typed faster. The pulse quickened, the walls shaking as energy arced across the chamber. The relay was failing, and if we didn't secure it soon, everything we'd done so far would be for nothing. The entity was waking, and we were running out of time. The relay chamber groaned as the entity's power swelled, its pulse echoing through the walls like a war drum. Each thud rattled the debris around us, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Brennan's fingers moved with the urgency of a surgeon racing against the clock, wires sparking under his grip as he tried to stabilize the power surge. I kept watch, my rifle aimed at the dark tunnels that led into the chamber. The entity's whispers clawed at my mind, louder and more insistent. Its voice like 1,000 screams merged into one. It was trying to break free, pushing against the containment field that barely held it at bay. "You're not going to win," I muttered, the words more for myself than for the entity. "We're not going down without a fight." Brennan cursed under his breath as the relay console flashed red. "It's not holding. The power levels are spiking, and the circuitry's overloaded." He ripped open a panel, exposing the core components. "If I can't reroute this energy, the whole containment field will collapse." I took a deep breath, steadying my aim. The shadows at the edge of the chamber flickered, the air growing colder as the entity's presence intensified. It was reaching out, testing the limits of its prison, and it was getting stronger. "Brennan, hurry," I urged, my voice low. "We're running out of time." "I'm trying," he snapped back, his voice tight with concentration. "This thing's ancient tech mixed with Threxian modifications. I'm practically reprogramming it from scratch." The hum of energy grew louder, and the walls shook as the entity pushed harder. Cracks snaked across the floor, glowing with an otherworldly light as the containment field strained under the pressure. My grip on the rifle tightened, my senses on high alert. The shadows moved again, but this time it wasn't just a trick of the light. Figures emerged from the darkness, human silhouettes, their forms distorted and flickering like old film reels. They were transparent, ghostly, and their eyes glowed with the same blue light as the energy pulsing through the chamber. My breath caught in my throat. These weren't Markarians, and they weren't Threxians. They were us. "Brennan, we've got company," I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. He glanced up, eyes widening as he saw the figures approaching. "Those are?" "Echoes," I said, the word tumbling out without thinking. "Or whatever's left of them." The ghosts moved silently, their faces locked in expressions of fear, anger, and determination. Some wore the uniforms of Earth's old defense forces, others the ragged clothes of survivors. They were remnants, memories etched into the fabric of this place, and they were drawn to the entity's power. As they drew closer, I felt the air grow colder, the whispers in my mind becoming a chorus of voices. They pleaded, accused, begged. Their emotions flooded my thoughts, threatening to overwhelm me. "We failed. We couldn't stop it. It's your turn now." I gritted my teeth, forcing the voices back. "Whatever happened here before, we're not letting it happen again." One of the ghosts, a tall man in a pilot's suit, reached out. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the history locked in his gaze, a battle against impossible odds, a sacrifice made to contain the entity, and a warning. The entity didn't just feed on energy. It fed on fear, on desperation, on the will to fight and survive. Brennan's voice snapped me back to the present. "Larissa, the containment's failing. I need a direct energy source to stabilize it." I scanned the chamber, eyes landing on an auxiliary power cell embedded in the wall, half covered by rubble. "There, can you tap into that?" "It's risky, but it's our only shot." Brennan ran over, prying open the access panel. Sparks flew as he connected cables, and the power cell hummed to life, its energy flowing into the relay. The containment field flickered, its light brightening as the system struggled to adjust. The ghosts were closer now, their hands outstretched, their faces desperate. They weren't hostile, at least, not yet, but the entity's power was pulling them in, merging their essence with its own. I could feel its hunger, its desire to escape. I raised my rifle, aiming at the power cell. If this doesn't work, I'm shutting it down. Give me a minute, Brennan shouted, his hands flying over the controls. The ground trembled, and the air crackled with energy. The containment field wavered, and the pulse of the entity grew louder, a roar that shook the walls. It was on the verge of breaking through. The ghosts surged forward, their forms intertwining with the energy threads crackling from the relay. Their faces twisted, and their voices became a wail, a cry that filled the chamber. I could feel their pain, their desperation. The pilot's ghost looked at me one last time, his expression pleading. You have to hold it. You have to finish what we started. The relay console beeped, and Brennan shouted, Larissa, now. I pulled the trigger. The shot hit the power cell, and the room exploded in light. The energy surged through the relay, the containment field flashing as it expanded, its light pushing back the shadows and ghosts alike. The entity's roar filled my mind, a scream of rage as its power was contained, forced back into its prison. For a moment, everything was blindingly bright. The voices, the whispers, the cold, they all vanished, replaced by silence. I blinked, my vision adjusting to the dim glow of the relay console. Brennan was slumped against the wall, breathing heavily, his face streaked with sweat. Did we? The ghosts were gone, and the chamber was quiet. The containment field thrummed steadily, its energy stabilizing. We did it, I said, lowering my rifle. For now. Brennan managed a grin. See? Told you we'd make it. But as we climbed out of the chamber, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. We'd bought time, but the entity was still there, waiting. And the ghosts, those echoes of the past, weren't just figments. They were a warning, a reminder that what lay beneath the surface of Earth wasn't a threat that could be easily contained. There was something else, something deeper that we hadn't yet uncovered. And if we didn't figure it out, everything we'd fought for might be for nothing. The corridors felt tighter as we made our way out of the relay chamber, the walls closing in like the jaws of some unseen beast. The distant hum of machinery reverberated through the complex, but my thoughts were elsewhere, turning over the pieces we had uncovered. The entity, the ghost, the echo of past battles, everything pointed to something larger, something we hadn't yet fully grasped. Brennan and I moved cautiously, checking every corner before advancing. The darkness of the base, the emptiness of it, made the silence feel more oppressive than ever. I replayed the encounter with the ghosts in my mind. They had seemed like echoes, but they were something more, remnants, maybe, or warnings. When we reached the main control hub, we paused. It was a mess of old Earth technology tangled with Threxian modifications. The room felt both familiar and alien, a clash of designs and eras. Dust-covered consoles lined the walls, blinking with signs of life. There was power here, but it was sporadic, like the base was operating on its last breaths. Brennan moved to the main console, his fingers flying over the keys. I watched the screen light up, text scrolling by as he navigated through the systems. "We need a status report," he muttered. "I want to know what we're dealing with." The screen flickered, showing a map of the facility and its power grid. The containment field around the entity pulsed, but it was weak, unstable. "It's holding, but barely," Brennan said, his eyes narrowing. "We have to reinforce it if we're going to keep it contained." "Any idea how long we've got?" I asked. "Not long." His voice was grim. "Maybe hours, maybe less." As he worked, I scanned the room, my eyes catching on something unusual, a row of cylindrical pods, stacked neatly along the far wall. They were connected to the main systems, and faint lights blinked on their surfaces. I approached cautiously, the air cold against my skin as I peered into one of the pods. My breath caught. Inside, a figure lay suspended in a stasis field. It was human, or at least it had been. The body was almost skeletal, its skin pale and stretched tight. Its eyes were closed, but its face was twisted in an expression of terror, as if it had been trapped mid-scream. I moved to the next pod, and the next, each one held a similar figure, all locked in the same state. It was like a graveyard, but these people weren't dead. Not entirely. The energy that ran through the pods connected them directly to the containment field. They were feeding it, sacrificing their life force to keep the entity contained. "Brennan, you need to see this," I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. He joined me, his expression darkening as he took in the sight. "What is this?" "Looks like they used themselves as power sources," I said. "Whatever these people were, they gave everything to keep the entity locked away." Brennan's hands clenched. "This base, it's more than a research station. It's a prison." He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "But why go this far? Why build something like this and then abandon it?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but we need to find out." Brennan returned to the console, his fingers moving faster now. "I'm accessing the logs. There has to be something, anything that explains what happened here." The screen flashed, data flooding the interface. Video feeds from the past flickered to life, showing scientists working frantically, their faces pale and drawn. They were afraid. I could see it in their eyes, hear it in the frantic exchanges as they fought to maintain the containment field. "We need more power, reroute the auxiliary systems." "It's not enough. We're losing containment." "Activate the stasis pods. Use everything we have." The footage cut out, replaced by a distorted voice, its tone clinical and cold. "Project Guardian is compromised. The entity's energy levels are escalating beyond predicted parameters. Commencing emergency protocol. Initiate stasis reinforcement. All personnel not required for stasis operation, evacuate immediately." The feed ended, and the console returned to the facility map. The power grid was flickering again, the containment field's pulse growing erratic. Brennan's expression was tight. They knew they were losing control. This place, it was a last-ditch effort to contain the entity, and they sacrificed everything to do it. "But they didn't make it," I said. "Whatever they tried, it wasn't enough, and now it's our problem." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the place pressing down on us. The people in the pods, they weren't just scientists or soldiers. They were heroes, giving their lives to keep the threat from escaping. And here we were, in the same place, facing the same nightmare. "What do we do now?" Brennan asked. I took a deep breath. "We finish what they started. But first, we need to know everything we're up against." He nodded. "I'll dig deeper, see if there are any other systems we can use to reinforce the field. But Larissa, if we can't hold it, we need to have a backup plan. We can't let this thing get loose." I met his gaze. "Agreed. But if we're going down, we'll make sure it doesn't take anyone else with us." As Brennan worked, I moved to another console, activating the surveillance feed. The cameras flickered to life, showing different parts of the base, empty corridors, power rooms, storage facilities. The visuals were grainy, the tech barely holding together. One feed caught my eye. It showed a chamber deeper within the base, one we hadn't reached yet. It was sealed off, its doors reinforced with layers of heavy metal. But there was something about it, a feeling in the pit of my stomach that told me it was important. "There," I said, pointing to the screen. "What's behind that door?" Brennan checked the system. "It's the core chamber, the heart of the facility's power grid. If there's anything that can stabilize the containment field, it's in there." "Then that's our next stop." He glanced at me. "You ready for this?" "Always," I said, gripping my rifle. "Let's finish this." We made our way to the chamber, the silence of the base following us like a shadow. The echoes of the past, the voices of the ghosts, they were gone, but their presence lingered in every corner. We were getting closer to the truth, and I had the feeling that whatever waited behind that door would either save us or be the end of everything. We moved cautiously, the corridor stretching ahead like a tunnel leading straight into the heart of darkness. The core chamber was deep within the facility, buried under layers of reinforced walls designed to withstand anything, from outside threats to internal disasters. As we approached, the air grew colder, and I felt the weight of the place pressing in, like we were descending into a tomb. The door to the chamber loomed ahead, A massive structure reinforced with multiple layers of steel and alien alloys. It looked like something meant to hold back a force of nature, and I wondered what was inside that required so much precaution. "Stay sharp," I whispered to Brennan. "We don't know what we'll find." He nodded, gripping his rifle. "I've got your back." The control panel next to the door was inactive, the screen dark. Brennan pried open the casing, exposing a jumble of wires and circuits. "The main power's offline here. We'll have to override it manually." I kept watch as he worked, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The silence was thick, but there was a low hum in the air, an energy I could feel vibrating through my bones. It was like the base itself was alive, and it knew we were here. With a spark and a hiss, the control panel lit up. Brennan grinned. "Got it." The door groaned as it slid open, revealing the chamber beyond. The room was massive, a cavern of steel and machinery. The core itself was a towering structure in the center, pulsing with an eerie blue light that cast shadows across the walls. It looked like a beating heart, and I could feel the energy radiating from it, seeping into the air. But it wasn't just the core that caught my attention. Around the room, lining the walls, were rows of containment tanks, similar to the stasis pods we'd seen before, but larger, more complex. They were filled with a thick, greenish fluid, and within each one, something moved. Brennan and I approached cautiously. The tanks were fogged over, but I could make out shapes, vague, humanoid figures floating in the liquid, their forms distorted by the glass. "What the hell are these?" Brennan muttered. I wiped the fog from one of the tanks, peering inside. The figure within was humanoid, but its skin was gray and translucent, its eyes dark and sunken. It was alive, its body twitching as if caught in a nightmare. The features were alien, but there was something disturbingly familiar about it, a twisted resemblance to humanity. "They look like hybrids," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Part human, part something else." Brennan frowned. "What were they doing here?" I shook my head. "Experimenting. Trying to create something, maybe to fight the entity. But why hybrids?" He moved to another console, accessing the logs. "We need answers." As he worked, I felt a prickle of unease. The core chamber was filled with power, but it felt wrong, like the energy was tainted, warped by whatever experiments had taken place here. The hybrids floated in their tanks, trapped in a state between life and death, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were more than just failed projects. "They were using humans," Brennan said, his voice tight. "Taking prisoners, volunteers, whoever they could find, and fusing them with alien DNA. They thought it might create a species that could withstand the entity's energy. And they failed. Not entirely." He pointed at the console. "Some of the hybrids survived, but they were changed. They became part of the containment system, linked to the core. They're still alive, keeping the entity in check." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So, they sacrificed these people to maintain the field." "Exactly." Brennan's jaw tightened. "And when they lost control, they sealed the chamber. The hybrids have been here ever since, keeping the entity contained." I stared at the tanks, the truth sinking in. The people inside, they had been humans once, just like me. And now they were trapped, twisted into something else, forced to act as living barriers against the entity's power. "Can we reinforce the containment field using the hybrids?" I asked. Brennan's fingers flew over the console. "I'm working on it, but it's risky. The hybrids are tied directly into the core, and their life force is what's keeping the field active. If we push them too hard, they'll die," I finished. "Yeah." I felt a surge of anger, not just at the aliens who had started this, but at the people who had been part of it. Humans who had sacrificed their own kind in the name of survival, who had created abominations and left them to rot in this place. It wasn't right. But we didn't have a choice. "Do it," I said. "If we're going to stop this thing, we need to give it everything we've got." Brennan nodded, and the console beeped as he initiated the sequence. The core's light brightened, the energy pulsing faster. The hybrids in the tanks twitched, their bodies reacting as the power surged through them. I could feel the temperature drop, the air growing colder as the containment field strengthened. "It's working," Brennan said, his voice tense. "The field is stabilizing." But even as he spoke, the lights flickered and the ground trembled beneath our feet. The core's pulse grew erratic, the energy spiking dangerously. The hybrids thrashed in their tanks, their faces contorted in pain. "We're overloading the system," Brennan shouted. I grabbed the rifle, my heart pounding. "We need to hold it just a little longer." The room shook, machinery sparking as the energy levels climbed. The tanks hissed and cracks formed in the glass. The hybrids screamed, their voices echoing through the chamber like a chorus of agony. Then, with a deafening crack, one of the tanks shattered, spilling its contents onto the floor. The hybrid within collapsed, its body twitching as it gasped for breath. It was barely alive, its eyes wide and filled with pain. I moved to it, kneeling down. "Can you hear me?" Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. It reached for me, its hand cold and slick. I felt a surge of pity. This creature had once been human, and now it was caught between two worlds, a victim of something far beyond its control. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "We'll make this right." The hybrid's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I saw something, an understanding, maybe, or a plea. Then its body went still, the life draining from its eyes as the energy left it. The core's pulse weakened, the field stabilizing. Brennan looked up, his face pale. "We've got it, at least for now. But this place is falling apart. We need to move." I nodded, standing. "Let's finish this." As we made our way out of the chamber, I glanced back one last time. The hybrids remained in their tanks, their bodies twitching as they kept the entity at bay. They were heroes, in their own way, sacrificed to hold back a darkness that should never have existed. And if we didn't succeed, their sacrifice would be in vain. We sprinted through the corridors, the tremors shaking the entire facility like a beast struggling to break free of its chains. The core was holding, but only barely. Every thrum of energy resonated through the walls, threatening to tear everything apart. Brennan and I had only minutes, maybe less, to reach the central command hub. It was our last chance to shut down the reactor before the entity broke free, and if that happened, Earth would be the first thing it devoured. "Stay sharp," I shouted over the roar of collapsing metal. Pipes burst overhead, spraying steam that hissed like 1,000 serpents. The lights flickered, plunging us into brief stretches of darkness. I could feel the facility's structure weakening. It was as if the place was dying. Brennan skidded to a halt in front of a massive doorway. "This is it, the command hub." I nodded, my hands tightening on the rifle. "Let's end this." He pried open the door's control panel, his fingers moving fast as he rewired the circuits. The door creaked and groaned before sliding open, revealing a room filled with screens and consoles, all displaying chaotic data streams. In the center of it all was a massive interface, our final target. We stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind us, sealing us in. I took a deep breath. "Let's make it count." Brennan moved to the console and started accessing the system. His face was a mask of concentration as he navigated through layers of encrypted code. "They've locked everything down. Whoever designed this didn't want anyone getting in or out." The screens flashed red, warning us of imminent collapse. I felt the temperature drop again, the air tingling with a familiar energy. My skin prickled as I realized that the containment field was fluctuating. Whatever we had done in the core chamber was only a temporary fix. "Work faster," I urged. He gritted his teeth. "I'm trying, but there's a secondary protocol in place. If we shut down the reactor, it triggers a self-destruct sequence." Of course. They'd built a failsafe. If the entity ever broke loose, they'd destroy the facility to prevent it from escaping. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Can you disable it?" "I can try, but it's going to take time." I turned back to the door, my eyes scanning the hallway beyond through the small viewport. The shadows moved, and I felt the same unsettling presence as before. It wasn't just an echo this time, It was something alive, something that was aware of us. Whatever had been watching us, it was making its move. Hurry, Brennan. We're not alone. I know, he snapped, his fingers flying across the keys. The screens flickered, and I watched as he bypassed one firewall after another. Just keep an eye out. I kept my rifle raised, my senses on high alert. The shadows outside the door coalesced, forming shapes that slithered and shifted in the darkness. The temperature continued to drop, the air filled with the crackle of static. Almost there, Brennan's voice was tense. I took a step back, my eyes locked on the movement outside. A low hiss filled the air, and I saw it, a figure, barely visible, moving through the shadows. It wasn't human, and it wasn't any of the hybrids from before. It was something else entirely, something that seemed to flow like liquid and solidify into a form only when it moved. It pressed against the viewport, and for a moment I saw a flash of its eyes, dark, intelligent, and filled with malice. I aimed the rifle, but it was gone before I could pull the trigger. We've got company. Brennan cursed under his breath. Almost there, just a few more seconds. The console beeped, and suddenly, the screens turned green. I'm in, Brennan shouted. I've got control of the reactor. Shut it down, I ordered. His hands flew over the controls, initiating the shutdown sequence. The reactor's hum grew louder, and the floor shook as the containment field flickered. The shadows outside the door pressed closer, clawing at the metal as if trying to break through. It's done, Brennan said, his voice triumphant. The reactor is offline. But as the hum faded, the lights flickered one last time before plunging the room into darkness. The console died, and I felt a surge of dread. Brennan, what happened? He tapped the screen, but nothing responded. Damn it, the failsafe. The room shook violently, and alarms blared. The self-destruct sequence had been triggered, and we were out of time. We've got to move, I shouted. Now. We bolted for the door, but the shadows outside had solidified, blocking our path. They surged forward, the air freezing as they approached. I fired, the shots echoing in the confined space, but the bullets passed through them like smoke. Larissa, behind you. I spun, but it was too late. Something cold and intangible wrapped around my arm, pulling me back. I fought, struggling against its grip, but it was like trying to fight the air itself. The cold seeped into my skin, and I felt my strength draining. Brennan lunged, slashing at the darkness with his knife. The shadows recoiled, giving us just enough space to slip through. We raced down the corridor, the walls trembling as the facility began to tear itself apart. We need to get to the escape pods, Brennan shouted over the roar of the collapsing structure. I pushed myself harder, the cold still clinging to me. How far? Just ahead, keep going. We rounded a corner, and the escape pod bay came into view. Pods lined the walls, their doors open and ready. Brennan dove for the controls, activating the launch sequence. Get in. I scrambled into one of the pods, and he followed, sealing the door behind us. The pod systems roared to life, and I felt the jolt as we were launched from the facility, the force pressing me into my seat. Through the viewport, I watched as the base below erupted in a wave of light and fire, the ground buckling as the self-destruct sequence completed. The entity's energy surged, a pulse of darkness that spread out like a shockwave. The pod shuddered as we were propelled higher, and for a moment, I saw the earth beneath us, scarred, but still alive. But the darkness didn't stop. It spread like a stain, consuming the remains of the base and moving toward the surface. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The escape pod rattled as we soared higher into the atmosphere, the facility's explosion a growing storm of fire and darkness beneath us. I watched as the shockwave of energy spread across the land, black tendrils of darkness consuming everything it touched. Whatever we had unleashed, it wasn't going to stop at the base. It was heading for the surface, and it had enough power to spread beyond Earth if it got the chance. The cockpit displays flickered as the pod stabilized, and Brennan's eyes met mine. We need to warn command. I nodded, my hands gripping the console as I connected to the main comms channel. "This is Larissa Gray, Earth Outpost 1. We have a critical containment breach. Repeat, a critical containment breach. Evacuate all personnel in the vicinity." Static greeted my call. I repeated the message, but the only response was silence. Brennan leaned forward, checking the console's diagnostics. The signal's being jammed. "How?" I asked, frustration clawing at me. "We're in orbit. It shouldn't be possible." "I don't know, but if the entity has extended its influence into the atmosphere, it might be interfering with our systems." I stared out at the darkening landscape below. The tendrils of darkness continued to spread, creeping across the landscape like fingers of smoke. I felt a chill in my bones, a sense of inevitability settling in. "It's adapting." Brennan's face paled. "If it can manipulate technology now, that's a new level of evolution." I knew what he was implying, but I couldn't allow the fear to paralyze us. "We need to reach command manually. We're not out of options yet." He nodded. "Agreed. We still have orbital satellites with direct channels. If we can get close enough, we might bypass the interference." I entered new coordinates, adjusting the pod's trajectory. The engines roared, and the pod surged forward, climbing higher. Outside, the planet's surface was becoming a chaotic landscape of shadows and fire. I felt an ache in my chest seeing it, our home being torn apart. "Larissa," Brennan said quietly, "you know the failsafe was designed to prevent this exact scenario. If it's evolving this fast, we may not have much time." "I know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But if there's even a chance to stop it, we need to try." The minutes stretched as we maneuvered the pod into position, approaching one of the few remaining satellites that hadn't gone dark. I watched the displays anxiously, waiting for a connection. Then, finally, a green light flickered. "We're in," I exclaimed, sending the emergency signal. "This is Outpost 1, reactor containment breach, catastrophic failure, potential global threat. We need immediate planetary defense intervention." For a moment, nothing happened. I felt the cold weight of despair start to settle in. But then, the console beeped, and a voice crackled through the static. "This is Command. Receiving you, Outpost 1. What is the nature of the threat?" Relief flooded through me. "Containment breach at Earth Outpost 1. The entity we encountered has evolved beyond our calculations. It's spreading and consuming everything it touches. It's using technology. We need to initiate planetary defense protocols." "Understood, Lieutenant Gray. Initiating defense protocols now. Estimated time to deployment, 5 minutes." 5 minutes. It was going to be close. I watched as the darkness continued to spread, swallowing entire sections of land. "Do you think it's enough?" I asked, feeling the helplessness gnawing at me. "It has to be," Brennan said, his eyes locked on the growing storm below. "If it's not, we're out of time and options." The pod continued to orbit, and I kept my eyes on the screens, tracking the entity's progress. It was adapting faster than anything I'd ever seen. I realized then that the energy we'd tried to contain wasn't just some entity. It was intelligent, far more than we'd anticipated. We had woken something ancient and calculating. And it was learning. The comms buzzed again. "Lieutenant Gray, planetary defense systems are online. We're deploying high-energy orbital strikes to neutralize the threat. Estimated impact in 3 minutes. Evacuate all personnel from the affected regions immediately." I turned to Brennan. 3 minutes. Do you think it'll work?" He clenched his fists, staring down at the screens. "It has to. Otherwise, it'll reach critical mass and spread beyond Earth." The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. I watched as the orbital strikes launched from satellites positioned above the planet. The pods streaked through the sky like falling stars, aimed directly at the epicenter of the spreading darkness. "Impact in 10 seconds, Command announced." The tension in the pod was electric. I gripped the console, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the view below. The first strike hit, and the darkness recoiled, its tendrils thrashing like a wounded beast. I felt a flicker of hope. But then, as the energy wave expanded, the darkness began to shift, absorbing the impact. The entity's mass twisted and surged, and in the blink of an eye, it enveloped the strike zone, consuming the energy and growing larger. "No," Brennan whispered. "It's feeding off the energy." The subsequent strikes hit one after the other, but the effect was the same. Each impact only seemed to make the entity stronger. The darkness expanded, and I felt the temperature in the pod plummet. Frost formed on the inside of the windows. I reached for the comms. "Command, abort the strikes. It's not working. The entity is adapting. It's using the energy against us." "Negative, Lieutenant Gray," came the response. "All strikes are automated. We're locked into the sequence." I slammed my fist against the console. "We're out of time." Brennan's eyes met mine, his expression grim. "There's one last thing we can do." "What?" He reached into his pack, pulling out a data drive. "I still have the core data from the facility, the data that shows its energy signature and containment protocols. If we can upload it to one of the satellites, we might be able to reverse the polarity of the energy field and neutralize it." It was a long shot, but it was all we had. "Let's do it." I adjusted the pod's trajectory, bringing us closer to the satellite. Brennan connected the data drive to the console, and I watched as the screen filled with code and diagnostics. Uploading, 30 seconds. The pod shook as another tremor rippled through the atmosphere. The darkness was reaching for us, tendrils clawing their way upward, as if sensing our intention. 20 seconds, Brennan muttered. "Almost there." The darkness surged, and the pod systems flickered. I gripped the controls, struggling to keep us steady. "Hurry, Brennan." 10 seconds. The shadows grew closer, and the temperature dropped further. Frost coated the inside of my helmet. I could feel the chill in my veins. 5, 4, 3. The console beeped, and the upload completed. The satellite systems engaged, and a new energy wave surged down toward the surface. The pulse spread out, countering the dark tendrils with a bright, burning light. For a moment, it seemed to work. The entity recoiled, the darkness shrinking as the energy pulse expanded. But then, just as it looked like we were winning, the shadows twisted, forming a massive, coiling shape. It fought back, pushing against the energy wave with a force that sent tremors through the atmosphere. "We need more power," I shouted. "It's all we've got," Brennan replied, his voice tight with fear. The darkness surged again, and I felt a shudder as the energy field began to collapse. The entity was too strong. It was evolving faster than we could fight it. "Larissa, if this doesn't work..." I didn't let him finish. "We're not giving up. There's one more option." "What?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "We can overload the satellite's core, send every bit of its energy down in one massive strike." Brennan's eyes widened. "That'll vaporize everything in the strike zone, including us. It's either that, or we let it spread beyond Earth. We have to make a choice." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." I accessed the satellite systems, initiating the overload sequence. The console flashed a warning, "Core detonation imminent." This is it. The energy built up, and the darkness surged again, but this time we were ready. I watched as the satellite's core unleashed its full power, a beam of blinding light that shot down to Earth. The darkness screamed, an otherworldly wail that reverberated through the pod. The energy wave expanded, engulfing the darkness and pushing it back. The tendrils disintegrated, and for a moment, everything was blinding white. When the light faded, there was nothing but scorched earth where the entity had been. The atmosphere cleared, and the displays showed the remaining sections of the earth, scarred but stable. "It's over," Brennan whispered, relief flooding his voice. I slumped back in my seat, the weight of everything crashing down. We had done it, stopped the entity. But at what cost? The surface of Earth would take decades, maybe centuries, to recover. Brennan's voice was soft. We saved it. We gave Earth a chance. I nodded, staring out at the ruins below. Yeah, we did. As our pod drifted in orbit, I knew one thing for certain: Earth had been tested, and we had survived. But the truth of what we'd faced, and what had once been buried deep beneath our feet, would never be forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, we'd be ready the next time they called Earth harmless.